At exactly 12:47 a.m. on a scorching Dubai night, security cameras captured something that would expose the deadliest love triangle in the city's history. A black sedan crept through Al Burshah's palm-lined streets with its headlights dimmed, heading toward the vast desert that surrounds this glittering metropolis. Inside that car sat a man whose hands were still trembling, a woman who would never see another sunrise, and secrets that were about to bury an entire family. The driver thought he was smart. He thought Dubai's endless sand would swallow his crimes. He was dead wrong. But before we get there, let me ask you something deeply personal. Have you ever had that gut-wrenching moment when you realized someone you trusted completely was living a double life? Have you felt your heart stop when puzzle pieces suddenly clicked together, revealing a betrayal so shocking it changed everything you thought you knew about your life? Maybe you've walked into a room and felt that electric tension that screams, "Something's not right here." Or perhaps you've caught someone in a lie so elaborate that you wondered how long they'd been deceiving you. If you're nodding right now, you understand exactly how Noura felt when she pushed open that bedroom door. What happens when a successful Egyptian wife discovers her husband's affair with their live-in Filipino maid isn't just about broken marriage vows. It's about power, desperation, and the explosive collision of three lives trapped in one house. What happens when confronting infidelity triggers something far more dangerous than heartbreak? In Dubai, where image is everything and financial ruin lurks behind every legal battle, some people make calculations that transform private betrayal into public horror. Some people decide that eliminating the problem is easier than facing the consequences. Stay with me through this story because what unfolded in Villa 32 will shatter every assumption you have about marriage, trust, and how far someone will go to protect their secrets. By the time I'm done, you'll understand why affairs in the wrong household don't just end relationships, they end lives. And if you think you can predict how this story ends, think again. Dubai's justice system has a way of ensuring that midnight drives to the desert become one-way trips to prison. Noura Ahmed had dreamed of Dubai long before she ever stepped foot in the Emirates. From her modest apartment in Alexandria, Egypt, she'd scrolled through Instagram photos of gleaming skyscrapers, luxury malls, and expatriate wives living lives that seemed pulled from magazine covers. When her husband Karim finally secured his residence visa sponsorship after nearly a decade of working construction contracts across the UAE, Noura thought her real life was finally beginning. She was 32, college-educated, and hungry for the opportunities that Dubai promised ambitious women. Within weeks of arriving, she'd landed a position with a media consulting firm near Dubai Media City. Not glamorous, but steady income in a city where rent could devour savings faster than a sandstorm. Karim, now a contracts manager overseeing villa developments, liked to remind her that they'd made it compared to the laborers still living in shared accommodations in Sonipur. Their leased villa in Al Burshah wasn't massive by Dubai standards, but it represented everything Noura had worked toward. 3 bedrooms, a small garden, and most importantly space for the family she hoped they'd start building. The monthly rent was crushing, but Karim insisted they needed to live the part if they wanted to advance in Dubai's competitive expatriate hierarchy. Here's what most people don't realize about watching true crime content. You're seeing patterns that repeat across cultures, across economic levels, across continents. But here's the thing that bothers me. Most viewers consume these stories without subscribing to channels that spend weeks researching these cases. If you're someone who actually values the work that goes into these investigations, hit that subscribe button. Don't be one of those people who watches everything but gives nothing back to creators. 3 months after settling into their new life, Karim made a decision that would destroy everything they'd built. Through a licensed domestic worker agency, he hired Clarissa Santos, a 31-year-old Filipino woman from Surigao del Sur. Her employment contract was standard: live-in housekeeping, cooking, general maintenance, with accommodations in the villa's converted storage room that had been modified with a small window and basic amenities. Clarissa arrived with references from previous employers in Abu Dhabi and Ras Al Khaimah. She was quiet, efficient, and desperately needed the 1,200 dirham monthly salary to support her 7-year-old son back home, who lived with her sister while Clarissa worked overseas. Like thousands of Filipino domestic workers across the Gulf states, She inhabited that invisible space between family member and employee, trusted with house keys and intimate family moments, yet always maintaining careful professional distance. The initial months felt like clockwork. Karim left before sunrise to avoid the nightmare traffic on Sheikh Zayed Road. Noura took the metro to Ibn Battuta station, then caught a taxi to her office. Clarissa transformed their villa into something worthy of the lifestyle magazines Noura had studied back in Egypt. Floors mopped to mirror brightness, laundry pressed and folded with hotel-level precision, meals prepared with fresh ingredients from the nearby Carrefour. But Dubai's blazing summer heat does something to people's minds. Temperatures that hover around 45 degrees Celsius for months create a pressure cooker environment where small irritations expand into major conflicts. The villa's air conditioning bills skyrocketed. Noura's commute became unbearable. Karim started coming home later, claiming overtime on projects that always seemed to require evening meetings with clients. The perfect life facade began developing hairline cracks that would soon shatter completely. Noura noticed Karim checking his phone with new urgency, stepping onto the back patio to take calls that he claimed were work-related emergencies. She noticed how Clarissa had started lingering in common areas after completing her tasks, finding excuses to organize already clean spaces whenever Karim was home. Neither woman realized they were both being manipulated by a man who'd decided that having everything meant he deserved more. The shift started with coffee. 2 mugs instead of 1 sitting on the kitchen counter when Noura returned from work. Clarissa's explanation was always reasonable. She'd made extra by mistake, or Karim had requested a second cup after his first went cold. But Noura had lived with Karim for 4 years, and he'd never been a multiple coffee person. Small details like this might seem insignificant, but they accumulate like sediment, building into something impossible to ignore. By October, Karim's schedule became erratic in ways that defied his previously predictable routine. Construction managers in Dubai work long hours, yes, but they don't typically receive urgent phone calls at 11 p.m. requiring them to check on equipment deliveries or resolve client disputes that couldn't wait until morning. When Noura questioned these late-night emergencies, Karim's responses carried a defensive edge that hadn't existed before. The dynamic between Karim and Clarissa transformed in subtle but unmistakable ways. Where he'd previously addressed her with formal employer politeness, he now spoke to her with casual familiarity that crossed professional boundaries. He knew her son's name, her hometown's weather patterns, her family's financial struggles. When did he learn these intimate details? When did housekeeping conversations become personal confessions? Clarissa, for her part, began exhibiting behavior that deviated from the careful professional distance she'd maintained during her first months. She started seeking Karim's approval for decisions that had never required consultation: which vegetables to purchase, how to arrange furniture for cleaning, whether to water the garden plants in the evening or morning. These weren't housekeeping questions. They were excuses for interaction. Noura's friend Rami, who worked 2 floors below her office building, became her confidant during smoke breaks on the emergency stairwell. She'd never been a regular smoker, but nicotine provided a socially acceptable excuse to step away from work and process the growing unease consuming her thoughts. During these conversations, Rami listened to Noura's concerns with the patience of someone who'd witnessed similar situations among Dubai's expatriate community. "Trust your instincts," he advised during one particularly tense afternoon in November. "Women always know. We just spend too much time convincing ourselves we're wrong." The physical evidence became harder to dismiss. Noura discovered Clarissa's laundry mixed with theirs in ways that suggested she'd been using their washing machine during hours when she should have been using the separate facilities in her quarters. She found her expensive French perfume bottle moved from its usual position on the bedroom dresser, with the cap slightly loose. Someone had been using it, and it wasn't Noura. Most revealing was Karim's sudden interest in Clarissa's work schedule. He began asking detailed questions about her days off, her plans for weekend activities, her need for transportation to specific locations around Dubai. This level of concern for their domestic worker's personal life was unprecedented and completely inappropriate. Do you know what frustrates me about viewers who watch these stories? They see all these red flags and think, how could she not know? But here's reality. When you're living inside the situation, When your entire life depends on believing your marriage is solid, you rationalize everything. You make excuses. You blame yourself for being paranoid. If this story is hitting too close to home, maybe it's time you subscribe to content that helps you recognize these patterns before they destroy lives. The breaking point approached when Noura began noticing changes in their intimate relationship. Karim became distant, distracted, going through the motions of marital affection without genuine engagement. He stopped initiating conversations about their future, stopped discussing plans for children, stopped engaging with her emotional needs entirely. When someone's physical and emotional energy is being invested elsewhere, their spouse feels the absence like a physical wound. Meanwhile, Clarissa's confidence grew in ways that should have raised immediate alarms. She started offering opinions about household decisions that exceeded her role, speaking more freely about Noura's work schedule and personal routines, and demonstrating knowledge about Karim's preferences that she shouldn't have possessed. The triangle was complete, and the explosion was inevitable. Thursday evening, November 15th. Noura left work 30 minutes early, claiming a migraine that wasn't entirely false. The stress of monitoring her marriage like a detective was exhausting her mentally and physically. She wanted nothing more than to go home, take a hot shower, and maybe have an honest conversation with Karim about their relationship's deteriorating state. The villa felt different when she entered. Not empty, but charged with an energy that made her skin prickle. 2 coffee mugs sat on the kitchen counter, both still warm to the touch. Steam rose faintly from the darker brew, Karim's preference for strong Arabic coffee that he only drank when he was nervous or excited. The living room was empty, but she could hear muffled voices coming from somewhere toward the back of the house. Her first thought was that Karim was handling work business, perhaps on a video call with clients or contractors. But something about the tone of those voices, soft, intimate, conspiratorial, made her pause. She kicked off her heels and walked barefoot across the cool marble floors, following the sound. The voices were coming from Clarissa's quarters, the converted room attached to the main house where their domestic worker was supposed to maintain appropriate boundaries between her professional and personal space. The door was slightly ajar. Not wide open, but enough to suggest someone hadn't been careful about privacy. Noura approached slowly, her heart hammering against her ribcage with increasing intensity. She told herself she was overreacting, that there was probably an innocent explanation, that she was about to embarrass herself with unfounded suspicions. She was wrong. Through the gap, she saw Karim sitting on the edge of Clarissa's narrow bed, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees in a posture of intimate conversation. Clarissa sat on her plastic chair, but she'd moved it closer than any professional discussion would require. Their faces were turned toward each other with the soft, focused attention reserved for lovers sharing secrets. They weren't touching. They didn't need to. The body language, the proximity, the comfortable familiarity of their positioning told the entire story. This wasn't the first time they'd sat like this. This wasn't a work conversation or a chance encounter. This was routine. Noura's hand trembled as she pushed the door wider. The hinges creaked. Both heads turned toward her with expressions that confirmed every suspicion she'd been battling for months. Guilt, panic, the deer-in-headlights look of people caught in the middle of betrayal. What is this? Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Karim shot to his feet, nearly knocking over the small side table beside Clarissa's bed. Noura, it's not. We were just talking about what? About what requires you to be in her bedroom having private conversations. Clarissa remained seated, her face a mask of trained neutrality that domestic workers perfect to survive explosive family situations. She understood her precarious position, caught between an angry wife and the man who controlled her employment visa. The argument that followed shook the entire villa. Voices escalated from whispered confrontations to full-volume accusations that bounced off tile walls and carried through air conditioning vents. Noura's fury wasn't just about the emotional betrayal. It was about the humiliation of being deceived in her own home by 2 people she'd trusted completely. Karim cycled through the predictable stages of caught cheaters: denial, minimization, justification, and finally admission. Yes, they'd grown close. Yes, he'd been confiding in Clarissa about his marriage problems. Yes, he'd been seeking comfort and understanding that he felt Noura couldn't provide. You want to know why? He shouted, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. Because she listens. Because she doesn't criticize everything I do. Because she appreciates what I provide instead of constantly demanding more. The classic cheater's defense. Blaming the betrayed spouse for creating conditions that justified betrayal. If you're still watching this, you're different from most viewers who click away when stories get uncomfortable. Most people don't want to confront the reality of how betrayal actually unfolds in real families. But you're here, which means you understand that these stories matter. They reveal patterns that could save marriages or save lives. Noura didn't sleep that night. She sat in their bedroom with her laptop open, researching Dubai's family court procedures, divorce requirements, and maintenance calculations with the methodical focus of someone preparing for war. The UAE's legal system is complex for expatriates, particularly women seeking to dissolve marriages where significant assets and residency status hang in the balance. By Friday morning, she'd made her decision. No more arguments. No more attempts at reconciliation. No more pretending their marriage could survive this level of betrayal and disrespect. I'm filing for divorce, she announced over breakfast, her voice carrying the cold finality of someone who'd moved beyond emotion into pure business mode. I've already contacted a lawyer. I know my rights under UAE law. Karim nearly choked on his coffee. In the weeks since the confrontation, he'd been operating under the assumption that time would heal this wound, that Noura would eventually forgive him for what he'd characterized as a mistake in judgment. He'd underestimated the depth of her humiliation and overestimated her willingness to accept his betrayal. You're overreacting, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. We can work through this. Marriage counseling, whatever you want. With her still living in our house. Noura gestured toward Clarissa, who was washing dishes with exaggerated focus to avoid eye contact. While you continue sneaking around having private conversations. You think I'm stupid, Karim? The reality of divorce proceedings in Dubai hit Karim like a physical blow. Under UAE family law, he would be financially responsible for Noura's maintenance during the waiting period and potentially beyond. Given their combined income and lifestyle, the court could order payments that would cripple his financial stability for years. But the money was only part of his panic. Divorce in Dubai's expatriate community carries social and professional consequences that can destroy careers. Construction companies prefer managers who appear stable and trustworthy. A messy divorce involving infidelity with a domestic worker would make him unemployable in his current sector. I'll lose everything, he said, more to himself than to Noura. My job, my reputation, my visa status. You should have thought about that before you decided to have an affair in our home. The mathematics of his situation became increasingly desperate as Friday wore on. Maintenance payments, legal fees, potential deportation if he couldn't maintain employment, and the humiliation of returning to Egypt as a failed expatriate. The costs were overwhelming. That's when Karim's thinking took a turn that transforms ordinary marital disputes into criminal cases. Instead of accepting responsibility and facing consequences like an adult, he began calculating alternatives that didn't involve legal proceedings or financial devastation. What if Noura simply wasn't around to file for divorce? What if the problem could be eliminated rather than managed? The thought should have horrified him, should have triggered every moral and ethical boundary that separates civilized people from criminals. Instead, it settled into his mind with the comfortable logic of someone convinced that his survival justified any action. Saturday morning, while Clarissa was at the corner market buying groceries, Karim suggested they talk privately upstairs, away from the kitchen where too many arguments had already taken place. He needed to change the environment, needed to get Noura somewhere more isolated for what he decided was necessary. Here's what bothers me about most people who consume true crime content. They watch these stories unfold and think they could never be involved in something like this. But the truth is, we're all capable of making terrible decisions when we feel cornered. The difference between you and someone like Karim isn't moral superiority. It's circumstances and choices. If you're someone who actually thinks about these psychological patterns instead of just consuming them for entertainment, maybe it's time you subscribe to channels that explore the deeper meanings behind these cases. Noura agreed to the private conversation because she wanted closure. She wanted to explain her position one final time before involving lawyers and courts. She had no idea that Karim had already decided that legal proceedings would never happen. As they walked upstairs together, Karim's pulse thundered in his ears. His hands were sweating. His mind had crossed a line that he couldn't uncross, moving from, "How do I save my marriage?" to, "How do I eliminate this threat to my future?" The bedroom door closed behind them with the soft click that would become the sound of Noura's final moments. The conversation lasted less than 5 minutes. Noura sat on the edge of their bed, a glass of water in her hand, preparing to deliver what she thought would be her final statement about their marriage. She wanted to explain her position clearly, without emotion, so there would be no ambiguity about her intentions moving forward. Karim stood near the window, his back to her, staring out at the afternoon heat waves rising from the villa's small garden. His mind had already moved beyond conversation into action. When fear and desperation occupy the same space as opportunity, some people make calculations that transform them from ordinary citizens into criminals. What happened next took less time than it takes to read this sentence. When murder enters a room, it's often quicker than the human mind can process. Pillow. A moment of pressure. A struggle that ends before it truly begins. The sound that stops isn't dramatic. It's the absence of breath. The silence that follows resistance. The room became still in a way that announced itself. Karim stepped back, looking at his hands as if they belonged to someone else. The rational part of his mind screamed that this couldn't be undone, that he'd crossed a line that would define the rest of his life. But panic doesn't think strategically, it just demands movement. He sat on the floor beside the bed for nearly an hour, staring at nothing, his mind cycling through impossible scenarios where the last 60 minutes could be erased. Reality kept reasserting itself with cruel precision. Noura was dead. He had killed her. The legal consequences would be catastrophic. That's when Clarissa returned from the market. She called out her usual greeting as she entered through the kitchen door, plastic bags rustling in her hands. The villa's silence felt wrong immediately. No television, no conversation, no normal household sounds that indicated life proceeding as expected. "Sir?" She called up the stairs, her voice carrying the trained deference of someone whose employment depended on maintaining appropriate boundaries. No response. She climbed the stairs slowly, her instincts warning her that something had fundamentally changed during her absence. The bedroom door was closed, which wasn't unusual, but the quality of silence coming from behind it felt different. When she knocked and pushed the door open, she found Karim sitting on the floor, his clothes disheveled, his face gray with shock and exhaustion. Her eyes moved to the bed, where Noura lay motionless, her position suggesting struggle followed by stillness. Clarissa had been trained in basic first aid during her domestic worker preparation courses. Her first instinct was to check for vital signs, to attempt resuscitation, to call emergency services. But Karim's hand on her arm stopped her movement. "Don't," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's too late." The next few hours became a nightmare of terrible decisions compounding each other. Karim convinced Clarissa that calling police would destroy both their lives. He would face murder charges. She would be deported as an accessory. Her son would lose his primary source of financial support. Fear makes people complicit in ways they never imagined possible. As night fell, Karim's panic demanded action. The body couldn't remain in the house. Dubai's forensic capabilities are sophisticated, and leaving evidence in place would guarantee his arrest within hours. The black sedan pulled out of Villa 32's driveway at 12:47 a.m., its headlights dimmed to avoid attracting attention from neighbors. The trunk contained a sealed plastic bag that represented the physical evidence of Karim's transformation from cheating husband to murderer. The drive to Dubai's desert outskirts took 35 minutes through mostly empty streets. Security cameras recorded the vehicle's license plate at multiple intersections, creating a digital trail that would later reconstruct the exact route with GPS precision. In the vast expanse of sand beyond the city's development zones, Karim believed he was disposing of his problem. Instead, he was creating evidence that would guarantee his conviction. Dawn broke over Dubai's industrial outskirts at 6:42 a.m. A municipal cleaning crew working their regular route along the desert access roads noticed something that didn't belong among the construction debris and scattered litter that accumulates in these areas. Mahmoud al-Rashid, a sanitation worker with 15 years of experience cleaning Dubai's less glamorous spaces, spotted the black plastic bag wedged against a concrete barrier. Something about its size and shape immediately triggered his professional instincts. This wasn't ordinary refuse. The smell confirmed his worst suspicions. His call to Dubai Police Emergency Services at 6:58 a.m. set in motion one of the Emirates' most efficient criminal investigations. Within 20 minutes, patrol units had cordoned off a 100-meter radius around the discovery site. By 8:30 a.m., Criminal Investigation Department specialists were photographing evidence and collecting samples with the methodical precision that makes Dubai's forensic capabilities internationally respected. The victim's identity was established within hours through fingerprint analysis. Noura Ahmed, Egyptian national, married to Karim Hassan, residing at Villa 32 in Al Bersha. The timeline began falling into place immediately, reported missing by her husband the previous evening. Found dead less than 12 hours later in circumstances that screamed foul play. Dubai police don't guess when they can verify. The city's comprehensive surveillance network captures millions of data points daily through traffic cameras, building security systems, and automated license plate readers positioned throughout the emirate. When investigators need to track vehicle movements, they don't rely on witness testimony. They follow digital breadcrumbs that create minute-by-minute timelines. The black sedan registered to Karim Hassan was captured leaving Villa 32 at exactly 12:47 a.m. The same vehicle was recorded returning at 2:31 a.m. GPS data from his mobile phone, which he'd forgotten to disable, created a precise map of his route to the disposal site and back. At 11:15 a.m., Detective Inspector Khalid Al-Mansouri knocked on Villa 32's front door with a warrant and 3 forensic technicians. Karim answered, looking like he hadn't slept, his hair disheveled, his eyes unable to focus properly. "We need to speak with you about your wife," Al-Mansouri said in the calm, professional tone that experienced investigators use when they already know the answers to the questions they're about to ask. The house told its own story. Forensic specialists found traces of the same plastic material used to wrap Noura's body in the villa's utility closet. They found fibers on a pillowcase that didn't match the bedroom's other linens. They found cleaning supplies used in quantities that suggested someone had attempted to eliminate biological evidence. Most damning was the roll of heavy-duty tape in Karim's toolbox, identical to the material used to seal the disposal bag. DNA analysis would later confirm skin cells and hair follicles that connected Karim directly to the crime scene. If the story is keeping you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button right now. Most viewers watch these investigations unfold without ever showing support for the channels that spend weeks researching police procedures and forensic evidence. Don't be someone who consumes this content without giving back. Show some appreciation for the work that goes into these cases. Clarissa's statement to investigators was devastating in its clarity. She described finding Karim in the bedroom with Noura's lifeless body. She detailed his panic, his desperate attempts to convince her that calling authorities would destroy both their futures. She explained how fear and manipulation had made her complicit in covering up a crime she never wanted to witness. By 4:30 p.m., Karim Hassan was under arrest for premeditated murder. By 6 p.m., he was in custody awaiting formal charging. By midnight, Dubai's major news outlets were reporting the arrest in a case that would become a cautionary tale about infidelity, desperation, and the inevitable consequences of trying to eliminate problems through violence. The Dubai Court of First Instance convened on March 14, 6 months after Karim Hassan's arrest. The courtroom was packed with journalists, expatriate community members, and legal observers curious about how the UAE's justice system would handle such a high-profile domestic violence case. Prosecutor Amina Al-Zahra presented evidence that formed an unbreakable chain of culpability. Security footage showing Kareem's vehicle leaving and returning at the exact times consistent with body disposal. DNA evidence linking him to the murder weapon. Phone records proving he'd lied about his whereabouts. Clarissa's detailed testimony about discovering the crime and being coerced into silence. The defense attempted to argue temporary insanity, claiming Kareem had acted in a moment of uncontrollable rage rather than premeditated murder. They portrayed him as a devoted husband driven to desperation by marital problems and financial pressure. The prosecution destroyed this narrative methodically. They demonstrated that Kareem had lured Noura to an isolated location specifically for the attack. They showed that his disposal of evidence indicated clear thinking and planning. They proved that his lies to police revealed consciousness of guilt rather than mental incapacity. Judge Hassan Al-Qasimi delivered the verdict with the measured authority that UAE courts are known for. The evidence clearly establishes premeditated murder, committed with deliberate intent to avoid legal and financial consequences of divorce proceedings. The defendant's actions following the crime demonstrate calculated attempts to evade justice. Guilty on all charges. Sentenced to death by execution. The appeal process lasted another 8 months. Kareem's family hired expensive legal representation, arguing that the evidence was circumstantial and that Clarissa's testimony was unreliable due to her precarious immigration status. The Court of Appeal reviewed every piece of evidence, every witness statement, every forensic report. They upheld the conviction unanimously. Clarissa Santos testified with quiet dignity throughout both trials. Her consistent, detailed accounts of events proved credible under intense cross-examination. The prosecution ensured her protection from retaliation and assisted with her legal status during proceedings. After the final verdict, she requested repatriation to the Philippines. Her agency facilitated the process, and she returned home to Surigao del Sur, where she reunited with her son and sister. The trauma of witnessing murder and being forced into complicity haunted her, but she rebuilt her life away from domestic work, finding employment in her hometown's growing tourism sector. Noura's parents flew to Dubai to claim their daughter's remains and personal belongings. Her father, Ahmed Mohammed, addressed the court during victim impact statements. "Our daughter came to Dubai seeking a better future. She deserved protection from the person who promised to love her, not death from his hands." Kareem Hassan remains on death row in Dubai Central Prison, his appeals exhausted, his execution pending final governmental approval. His family ceased contact after the verdict, unable to reconcile the man they thought they knew with the murderer the evidence revealed. Villa 32 in Al Bersha was re-rented within 6 months, the management company offering no disclosure about its violent history to new tenants. What can we learn from this tragedy that destroyed 3 lives and left a family shattered across 2 continents? First, infidelity is never just about sex or emotional connection. It's about power, control, and the dangerous dynamics that develop when people live in confined spaces with unequal authority structures. Kareem didn't just betray his marriage vows. He exploited a vulnerable woman whose employment visa depended on his goodwill. When employers cross boundaries with domestic workers, they create situations where consent becomes impossible to determine and exploitation becomes inevitable. Second, financial pressure reveals character in ways that comfortable circumstances never can. When Kareem realized that divorce would cost him money, status, and professional reputation, he chose murder over accountability. This tells us everything about his fundamental values. He believed his comfort was worth more than his wife's life. Third, the justice system works when evidence is preserved and witnesses tell the truth. Clarissa could have fled Dubai immediately after discovering the crime. She could have remained silent to protect her own immigration status. Instead, she chose to testify honestly, knowing it would cost her job and force her to return home. Her courage ensured that Noura's murder didn't go unpunished. Most importantly, this case demonstrates that domestic violence escalates in predictable patterns. The emotional affair, the financial threats, the isolation, the explosive confrontation. These are warning signs that appear in countless relationships before they turn deadly. Recognizing these patterns could save lives, but only if people take them seriously instead of dismissing them as normal relationship problems. Dubai's message to potential criminals is crystal clear. The city's surveillance capabilities, forensic technology, and legal system will find you, prosecute you, and punish you to the full extent of the law. There are no perfect crimes in a place where cameras capture every movement and laboratories can extract evidence from the smallest biological traces. For the expatriate community, this case serves as a reminder that personal problems don't disappear when you move to new countries. They follow you, often intensified by the stress of cultural adaptation, financial pressure, and social isolation. Here's what I want you to remember. Betrayal always has consequences, but murder makes those consequences permanent and irreversible. Karim thought he was solving his problems when he killed Noura. Instead, he guaranteed that his problems would define the rest of his life. Thank you for staying with me through this difficult but important story. If this content made you think differently about relationships, justice, or the warning signs of domestic violence, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss these crucial stories. Your support helps me continue investigating cases that reveal uncomfortable truths about human nature and the consequences of our choices. These stories matter. Your engagement matters. And remember, in a world where justice can be swift and final, the choices you make in your private moments determine your public future.